In these set of videos, we're going to talk about 45, 45, 90 on special right triangles, and that's a certain type of special right triangle, and there's two of them. This is the first one, and one thing you do not want to forget is what the ratio is for this type of triangle, and it is right here. This is given to you on the formula chart, so you have to know how to use it, but you do not need to memorize it. But in the end, you pretty much will start memorizing what it is. So what this means is that in a right triangle, so in a special right triangle, if we have a 45, 45, 90 degrees are the three angles inside, this x, x, and x squared root 2 are in order from smallest to largest across from the angles smallest to largest. So because we have two angles that are the same, we know that the sides across from them will be congruent to each other, and that's why both of those are x's. Then the hypotenuse is the longest side, and if we take one of the legs, we can multiply it by the square root of 2, and that would give us the hypotenuse. So that's what it means right here when it says the hypotenuse is 1 or square root of 2 times as long as each of the legs. So in our problems, what we are going to do is on each of the triangles, you want to label each of the sides with parts of the ratio. So on number 1, first we need to put in, it says both of the legs are 6. We need to write that in the problem to begin with. Now for my ratio, I'm going to use green again, and I'm going to put my x's for the two legs, and the hypotenuse is the x square root 2. Now, you need to, if you're given a side length, so here we have a number that's paired up with one of my variables, I'm going to set it equal to that corresponding part of the ratio. So I know then that my green x will equal the 6. So if I know that my green x is 6, I can take that and I'm going to put it into all other parts in my triangle. So I know that the hypotenuse was x square root 2, but I know now my x is literally a 6, so my hypotenuse will be 6 square root 2. We're going to do the same thing now for number 2. It tells us that both legs are 3 square root 2, so I put those in my picture. Next, we need to label our sides with the ratio. So I know my two legs are x. I know my hypotenuse is x square root 2. Now, since I have a number here with my ratio, there is my equation. So x equals 3 square root 2. And since we know that x equals 3 square root 2, that means I can take that number and put it into any of the x's, any of my green x's that I still have in my picture. Since the hypotenuse is x square root 2, I'm putting it in place of my x. So in place of my x, I have a 3 square root 2. But I still had the square root of 2 there from before, and I need to simplify it. Remember when we multiply square roots, if they're both underneath the radical, I can multiply those together, so that gives us a 4. The square root of 4 gives us a 2, which means we've got 3 times 2, and our hypotenuse will end up being a 6. We already know what the other leg is, so all the piece that we were missing was the 6, and then the leg was the 3 square root 2. Just like we did before, we need to draw in our picture the hypotenuse as 2 square root 2. Now we need to label each of the sides with our ratio. So we have x, x, x square root 2. We need to set equal wherever the number is equal to my ratio. So there's my equation. So x square root 2 needs to equal my side length of 2 square root 2. And we need to solve for x. On the previous two questions, we already had x equal, so we didn't have to solve for x, but here we do. So we need to solve for x. We have to divide by this green square root 2. So divide both sides by the square root of 2. That gives us x is equal to 2. So I put it back into any of these, wherever my x's are. That gives me what those side lengths are going to equal. So since x equals 2, there are my two legs. So both of the legs are going to be a 2. Sometimes it will make it easier if you color code. So if you use a certain color for each of your ratio numbers, then it makes it easier to find where they need to go back in. On number 4, we are given the hypotenuse, and I'm going to write that in red so I can keep all of my side lengths the same. So there's my original number. I need to label my sides as my x, x, x square root 2. Wherever your number is located, you set it equal to that part of the ratio. So I have x square root 2 is equal to my red 10. I need to solve for the x, which means we need to get rid of the square root of 2 again, so I divide by the square root of 2 on both sides. Now remember, in one of the previous videos, we cannot leave the answer that way. So we need to multiply by the square root of 2 on the top and bottom. So I get 10 square root 2 over the square root of 4. The square root of 4 simplifies down to just the 2. And then we can always check for reducing. So this gives us a 5 square root 2 is what my green x is going to equal. And if we take that and put it back into any of the green x's, that will tell us those lengths. That means the leg is a 5 square root 2 and a 5 square root 2. To answer the two questions, to find the length of AC would be 5 square root 2. The length of CB would also be 5 square root 2. On number 5, we do not have a picture, and this is a very important question that you need to understand how to do. If we have to find the length of a diagonal in a square, we need to draw our square. We know that a square has 4 equal sides, and we know that there are right angles in the corners of all 4 angles. We need to find the diagonal going down the center, and we are given the side lengths are 6. We know all side lengths are 6. So really you just need to look at one of those triangles, and we know since it is a square and both of these sides are 6, that means that the other 2 angles inside are 45. So if we label our sides as our x square root 2, we need to set it equal, so that means our green x equals a 6. We can take that and put it back into any of the other places where our green x is at. So I want you to find what is the diagonal length going to be for this question. Since the diagonal is x square root 2 and we know our 6 is the x, you should have gotten that the diagonal is 6 square root of 2. Number 6 now is pretty much the exact opposite. We still have a square, but we are given different pieces. We know it's going to be a 45, 45, 90, but this time the hypotenuse is given to us as our 10 square root 2, and we need to find what the leg is going to be. So let's just draw one big triangle again. Our hypotenuse is the 10 square root 2, and we know the angles are going to be our 45, 45, 90. I'm just not going to put those in there. My ratios gives us x, and x square root 2. We set it equal to the part or the number that we are given, which is our 10 square root 2, and then you can solve for your x. So go ahead and I want you to solve for the x. What you should have done is divided by the square root of 2, so x is going to equal 10. All right, so now if we have to answer the different questions, we know the green x is 10. We can put that back into any of the different pieces. So both sides or legs in our triangle are going to be just a 10 since they started out as just x. Number 7, we need to draw our picture again. It is a tree. So you got a tree. We have a shadow. You have to think of where does the shadow end up. The shadow is on the ground. Some of you might think that the shadow's in the air, but it's really not. It ends up on the ground. That's where we see it. It makes a 45-degree angle with the ground, so that means the other angle will also be 45 degrees. The length of the shadow itself is 15 feet, where the shadow is on the ground. And we need to figure out how high is our tree. Since we know it's a 45, 45, 90 triangle, we can put our x square root 2 into it. Wherever the number is at is what we set equal to it. So we have x equals 15. So all of my green x's are 15. So if we put that in to both of those locations, that means that over here for my height of the tree will be 15. The length in the air from the tip of the tree all the way down to the ground would be 15 square root 2. But they're looking for just how tall the tree is. So that would be our 15 feet tall for the tree. Again, I strongly encourage you to color code like I've been doing. It makes it a lot easier to figure out where your numbers need to go back in. And if you have any questions for your teacher, go ahead and put your answers or your questions down here so you can ask in class when you see them next.